morning, Don Russell, and he'd called me on the phone the other day, and we were talking about camp coming up, and I told him I was concerned that too many people here would know me and I couldn't make things up. Because I had it all planned to tell the story about how Don actually had a wooden leg at one time. And knowing Don, I know he could have found one at a garage sale. Don is the master garage sale guy. He's kind of got a permanent garage sale at his house, I think. It's kind of the way to describe it. There are other stories here I could tell, like, going to the garage sale the day after the day his son was born. Is that right? Yeah. Finishing the nursery by going to a garage sale. But I wouldn't tell that story, Don. I've been in Christian bands since I was about 18, and so that's a long percentage of my life. And music has always been real important to me. I kind of got hooked into it because my brother learned how to play the guitar, and it was cool, and a lot of girls sat around him when you had a guitar, and that seemed like a good thing to do. So I learned how to play the guitar. There are other instruments I could have learned how to play. Somehow the baritone sax just doesn't seem to attract women like the guitar does. And and of course the guitar, for me, it probably didn't matter. I could have had either one and it would have been about the same. So I learned how to play the guitar and got involved in different musical groups. And when I first started playing, it's like when you do anything, you really want to be good at it. I don't know how many of you have ever been to a big concert or a major sporting event, and there's something that happens when the crowd all kind of comes together and yells. That's kind of a real rush, and I always wanted that to happen to me when I was on stage. And obviously Christian music is generally not where those kinds of things happen, and yet in my mind I always had sort of this image that someday that was going to happen to me. And it hasn't, and I'm still playing. In fact, one of the last times we played, the band I'm in, we played in Okoboji, and we were supposed to play outside, and it was in the low 40s when we started, and fingers don't work real well, and crowds tend to not come out in the 40s, and so we played to about 8 people, and maybe 3,000 or 4,000 people in condominiums across the street, because we just cranked it up and played. And so those kinds of things are reality. The reality sinks into me. Another experience that I had, people always tell me that not always, occasionally people will compliment me on my guitar playing, and I always say thank you to them. And I always remind myself there are people starving to death who are much better than I am who can't make a living at it. And that's a sense of reality for me. The other part of reality was with sports, that I love basketball. That's one of the reasons I wore my Celtics sweatshirt today. This is also out of mourning out of the fact that the Celtics have no one in the All-Star game tomorrow. That's kind of depressed me. But I love basketball. I coach basketball. I play it occasionally. But I don't have a basketball body. I can enjoy the game and I can play it. And I can remember looking at guys in high school, and they had that long, thin body with the long arms, and they could jump and they could run. And I couldn't do either particularly well, but I love the game. And I always wanted to play college basketball. And somewhere around my junior year, I realized that was never going to happen. And no matter how hard I worked, I couldn't make myself taller or faster. And I can enjoy the game still. I can play a lot. And I can, I kind of enjoy it vicariously as a coach, and maybe my sons will play. But that realization hit me eventually that I'm not gonna play basketball. That was kind of hard, But in the end, it's okay, because I love the game and I can watch it and have fun. Those things happen as you grow up, and that's part of life. And sometimes those can be traumatic and they can be hard on you. Sometimes they can be humorous. But people that have that accurate self-perception, that accurate self-image, are the ones that I think are really happy in life. Not that they downgrade themselves too much or uplift themselves too much, but they see themselves as Jesus sees them, sees the talents that you have. And if you're in that mode, the victories you do have in life are fun and are enjoyable, and they bring joy to your life. That when you are successful in the proper way, we I coach boys and girls basketball at Stillwell. We have a split season. The girls play basketball before winter break and the boys play after. And we have routinely somewhere, we just have 8th grade sports, and we'll have routinely about 50 girls that go out for basketball and about 65 boys in 8th grade. And that'll narrow down some. We'll usually get down to around 35 girls and somewhere around 50 boys. And we play 3 games every time we play. We play an A game, a B game, and a C game. And as you can imagine, the A game is for the kids that have played a lot of basketball, and they're good at it, and they're tall. The B game is for the kids. A lot of these kids are going to be good basketball players, but their bodies haven't quite caught up with the rest of them. We had a kid this year who was 6'4" in 8th grade, and the way I always used to like to describe him is it looked like 3 people were using his body at the same time. Just kind of going everywhere. And in fact, there's a current NBA player that played on the B team at Stillwell. Matt Bullard, who plays for the Houston Rockets, was a B player at Stillwell Junior High. Obviously, he got a little bit better. And then the C team is for the kids that this may be their only athletic experience in life. And so we try to make it as fun for those guys as possible. And this year we had 2 kids on the team that the other coach and I were talking that we thought if both of these guys would score in a game during the year that we could retire and having achieved everything a coach could ever hope for. I mean, it would have been amazing for both these kids to score. And I was watching one of these guys warm up before practice, and I watched him for about 15 minutes just shooting at a basket by himself. And he made 2 or 3 baskets in a 15-minute time. And he's a great kid. He's funny, and he's always going to give you 100%. 100%, whatever he does. And he's kind of an average student and kind of quiet and shy, and he's kind of, gawky, and he's a junior high kid. I mean, he's 8th grader. And in one game this year, he actually scored twice, 4 points. And this made it made his year. When he looks back at junior high, I don't think he'll remember English class or social studies or anything. He's going to remember scoring 4 points in a basketball game and having the coach jump up and yell, "Good job, Joel!" And in fact, he told one of his other teachers that he came in, he kind of has a sheepish grin, he came in and scored 4 points in the game last night. And the teacher's a friend of mine. He said, "Oh, what happened?" He said, "Coach Beals," who's the other coach, he jumped up and went, "Hoo, hoo, hoo, hoo," at me. So those kinds of experiences, that's real satisfying to me to see that. Sports has been an important part of my life, and so sometimes I use sports analogies, and people tend to get bored with it. But 2 of my best friends at work are the wrestling coaches there. And they probably have a wrestling program at that junior high that would be the rival of most high school wrestling programs. In the 5 years I've been there, they've lost 2 meets. And they don't do it because they drive their kids to be good. They don't beat their kids. They don't yell at them. They don't scream at them. What they do is they bring them there and they put them in better shape than they've ever been in their life. And some of those guys may be the best shape they'll ever be in. That you can kind of see the bodies are starting to spread out in 8th grade a little bit, and they're not real athletic. And they're going to be the best shape they're in, and they teach them very simple things, and they teach them how to do it well. They'll teach them 2 or 3 wrestling moves, and then 2 or 3 counters, and then just turn them loose. And they get this attitude into these kids that they go out there and they're going to go 100% all the time. And it's amazing to watch them take these little boys, and when they get done with wrestling season, they are somebody. This year, they always have black T-shirts for these guys, and they have a big tiger on the front and always some motto on the back. And this year's motto was "Go hard or go home." And that's just the motto of these 2 guys. They are 100% all the time. And they have similar stories. And one of the great stories they had was a kid that had been pinned every time that he had wrestled. And it was getting to the point where they didn't want to send him out on the mat anymore. I mean, he'd just come off all depressed. And they sent him into I think it was one of the last meets of the season. It was a home meet. And he didn't get pinned. He lost. He got clobbered, but he didn't get pinned. And he stood up on the mat, and suddenly the entire team ran out and picked this guy up and carried him off on their shoulders. And the coach from the other team obviously was a little stunned by this. Thought maybe he got the score wrong. But that's one of those great moments in people's lives where you achieve something, and you measure by the world standards, and gosh, that's not much. Avoiding getting pinned is not much. But for that kid, boy, that was an incident of his life that he'll remember, and it was a point of victory. And that's a reality too, isn't it? I mean, that's a reality for him, that I can accomplish a goal. I can set a goal for myself and reach it. It's an attainable goal, and I think we know Jesus through those incidences. And I think if that, I don't remember the kid's name, and I don't know if he was a Christian or not. I don't know if he will be in the future. But if he does, that's going to be an experience, I think, that he is going to remember, and that's going to help him to understand something about Jesus, something about how we measure success and how we measure reality. I want to open to Genesis 32, verse 22. This is one of those stories in the Bible that I can remember hearing it as a kid and kind of wondering what's going on here. This is a story about Jacob. I always had a hard time liking Jacob. Anybody else feel that way about him? I mean, he's kind of a sneak, isn't he? Yeah. I mean, he cheats his brother out of his inheritance. And Dad plays by, the family plays by the rules, that he got the blessing. And so poor Esau takes off. And this is the story about when Jacob's going to be meeting Esau again. And he hears Esau is coming with a pretty big army. And so Jacob splits his holdings in two so that if one half is attacked, the other half can still get away. And then he sends presents to Esau. And he does it in kind of an interesting way. He kind of staggers them. And each little group of people gets to Esau at a different time. They say, he's supposed to ask, well, if you ask, who do these flocks belong to? He says, oh, they're from Jacob, and they're here as a gift to you. And so the stuff keeps going out to Esau, and he's hoping to soften him up. So Jacob even is conniving at the end. And what I liked about it is that he prays to God to essentially deliver him, and then starts to manipulate the situation himself. Okay, which is a lot like me. And then before he meets Esau, he meets somebody else. It's an interesting story. It's in 32:22. That night Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 maidservants, and his 11 sons, and crossed the ford of Jabbok. After he had sent them across the stream, he sent over all his possessions. So Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him till daybreak. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip, so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. Then the man said, "Let me go, for it is daybreak." But Jacob replied, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." This is certainly in character for Jacob. The man asked him, "What is your name?" "Jacob," he answered. The man said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with men and have overcome." Jacob said, "Please tell me your name." But he replied, "Why do you ask my name?" Then he blessed him there. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "It is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared." Then the sun rose above him as he passed Peniel, and he was limping because of his hip. Therefore, to this day, the Israelites do not eat the tendon attached to the socket of the hip, because the socket of Jacob's hip was touched near the tendon. Jacob's a lot like you and I think. We're wrestling with God, and God could change the rules if he wanted to and overcome us pretty easy. Dislocations are something that I know a fair amount about. I was what's called a chronic dislocator. I used to dislocate my shoulder all the time. And I remember the first time I did it, I was playing basketball, which seems to be where I normally get hurt. I played basketball 3 times in a row. I played basketball with about 9 months in between, and all 3 times I was taken away in an ambulance. And yes. Very slow, very slow. And I remember the first time I dislocated my shoulder, I was playing at a church in Des Moines, and I got a rebound, and my hand was extended back, and a guy came over my back and had his hand in front of the ball, and I was trying to pull the ball forward, And the ball stayed there, and my wrist stayed there, and my shoulder went forward. And so I fell down screaming, and I looked down, and the ball of my shoulder was kind of sticking out here. And at that point, I figured out something was seriously wrong. And in about 5 minutes after they stopped playing, they just kept playing right around me. They stopped, and obviously I was hurting a little bit, and I kind of pulled my arm up here, hoping to reduce it and to kind of get it to go back in, and it didn't work. And so I'm trying to get comfortable, and I think some people prayed for me, and the ambulance came to take me to the hospital, and the guy. They thought my arm might have been broken, so they wanted to put an air splint on. Now, I'd been playing basketball for about 2 hours at this point, and the guy puts the air splint on my arm, my forearm, and he puts the inflation valve right here in my armpit. And he's looking at this, and he says, well, I guess I need to blow it up. And I can remember saying, I'm sorry. So he blew up the splint, and they took me to the hospital. And it was hurting a little bit at this point, and I'd kind of been, I'm kind of numb to the pain. And they're trying to, and at this point, the longer a dislocation is out, the harder it is to get back in. And I'd ripped things up fairly well at this point, I think. And they get me into the hospital, and they're trying to get it back in, and they can't. And what they end up doing is laying me on the exam table in the emergency room, and they hang my arm down the side of the table. And they tape weights onto my arm. And it's still not going anywhere. And it really didn't hurt that much. I think they'd given me Demerol and something else, codeine. Yeah. And so it didn't hurt at all until they pulled on my arm. Then it just hurt a little bit. And finally, they pulled, and it went in. And I can just remember going, "Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you." And I said it over and over again. And the doctors were all, boy, that was a hard one. No, it wasn't their arm that was out. So I can identify with Jacob. I think Bo Jackson can probably identify with Jacob too. Bo Jackson's had the hip dislocation. Every once in a while, God has to touch our hips or our shoulders or our mouths or our brains and dislocate them for a while to get us to pay attention and to get us to see him as he really is. And Jacob, once he figured this out, was, bless me. Bless me. Jacob was into blessings. He knew where everything came from. He knew the source of everything, but I don't quite approve of his methods. Actually, I do approve of his methods because I do them myself, but I just don't like to say I approve of them. So Jacob had wrestled with God, and I think we all kind of wrestle with God a little bit, like I wrestled with that guy with the basketball. And our wrestling, I think, is what hurts our Christian growth. I think you and I are kind of stuck sometimes in a mire because we wrestle with God a little bit too much. Maybe if Jacob just would have given up, let God take over, the blessing would have come a little easier without the pain. But sometimes the pain is necessary. I want to take a look at Hebrews. I'm not sure where I want to go here. Let's take a look at Hebrews 5:11. When I was getting ready for this, I know I'd read this before, and yet somehow this didn't quite click until I read it coming up for this. 5:11 and 12. He says, "We have much to say to you about this, but it is hard to explain because you are slow to learn. In fact, though by this time you ought to be teachers, you need somebody to teach you the elementary truths. of God's Word over again, all over again. You need milk, not solid food. Then let's skip down to 6:1. Therefore, let us leave the elementary teachings about Christ and go on to maturity. Now, I think what I've missed before is that the next word, which is not. It says, not laying again the foundation of repentance from acts that lead to death, and of faith in God, instruction about baptism, the laying on of hands, the resurrection of the dead, and eternal judgment. God permitting, we will do so. He is saying that those are the elementary basics of Christianity that we need to move beyond. Not that we ignore those things, but that we should have those teachings so firmly entrenched. We should be so sure of our salvation, so sure of our relationship with Jesus, and so sure about who Jesus is that we don't have to be taught those things over and over again. And then he goes on to spell out in chapter 7 what the reality is, what he wants us to move on to. Boy, that was like a 2x4 across the forehead. That got my attention because I'm struggling with those things all the time. I still struggle with repentance, sin, over and over again. And not knowing that, or I shouldn't believe that I'm never going to sin again. And yet, somehow I can't get beyond the same sins. And I can't get beyond the same cycle. And yesterday I talked about the priestly rituals of over and over again. One of the other sections of Hebrews is later on in 9. He's talking about how Christ did this once. He died once for us, not over and over again. And I think the writer of Hebrews was setting that up against the pagan teachings of those days, which was the cyclical nature of sacrifice and renewal over and over and over again. And he was saying that's paganism. The reality of Jesus is that Jesus died once for all and it's done. And we continually try to re-crucify Jesus. We don't allow him to be the risen Lord standing out there beyond the reality, waiting for us to see him. C.S. Lewis was, for someone I've never met, he's probably the most influential person in my life. And he's influential because when I was going to college, I went to Simpson College, which is a Methodist college. And there were Christian teachers there, and there were teachers who were atheists, and there was everything in between. If there is, I don't know what's in between. But whatever it is, they were there. And I was reading C.S. Lewis. I kind of got into him through the science fiction and the children's stories, and I started to read some of his more theological writings. And they were real important to me because they gave me a rational basis for belief. And so it was very important. And if you've ever read Pilgrim's Regress by C.S. Lewis, it's a little analogical book that I would recommend to you. It's about his kind of conversion experience. And he talks about how the pagans sort of had it right. They sort of had it right. They had these symbols that called them to Jesus. And yet they missed the point. They slipped by because they didn't see that it was once and for all, and one sacrifice is good for everybody. And he talks about how the people of the law, the Jewish people, probably had it more right because they had the law and they understood the nature of sin and the nature of repentance. But it's through this person, Jesus, that we bridge the chasm that separates us from God and from seeing God as he really is. And we tend to fall on either side of that line. Some of us are sort of the over and over again types, repeating cycles. Others of us are into the legal aspect of it. It's Christianity by the law. Some of us flip-flop back and forth between the two. And yet, somewhere out there is something beyond that, something more important, beyond these basics that we have to get over, and that's Jesus, who's just standing there calling to each one of us. Hebrews 1 and 2. In the past, God spoke to our forefathers through the prophets at many times and in various ways, but in these last days he has spoken to us by his Son, whom he appointed heir of all things, and through whom he made the universe. The phrase I like there is he has spoken to us by his Son. Not through his Son, not in his Son, but by his Son. That Jesus is the message. That's the message for us, is Jesus. My three kids are my three sons. I always feel like I should, da 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 da. You just smoke a pipe or something. Have some old guy named Charlie hanging around in our house. It was a Tramp, yeah, Tramp the dog, yeah. My three sons are real different people. Michael was our firstborn, and like a lot of firstborns, we probably overreacted to almost everything with him. And he was a fairly serious baby. I have told some of you this, that as a baby, people would, come up and play with him, and he would just look back at them. And I think it took some people, startled them a little bit. And John is just John, the middle one. He's, I think, pretty smart little boy, but tunnel vision. Very intense. My friend, the wrestling coach, says, this boy's a wrestler. He's a wrestler. And what inspired him to do that is we had him over to our house, Rick and Kathy, and John was walking across the floor, and he had these plastic binoculars, and he was swinging them. And every time they came around, they hit him on the head. Bop, bop, bop. And he just kept walking, swinging the binoculars. Bowling pins, yes. Bowling pins all over. And Matthew is just he's just a happy little boy. He's just happy. Even when he's tired, he's happy. I can remember watching him on the floor the other day. John had been playing with some toy and had left it on the floor, and Matthew had seen it from across the basement, and he was crawling across, and his eyes were getting bigger and bigger and bigger. He's getting close. I don't know what it was, getting closer and closer and closer. John sees him, runs over, grabs the toy, and runs away. Matthew stops, looks around, starts crawling after something else, okay? He's the happy kid. And I love them all. And each one is just different, and each one has their little insights into life. And what's interesting is Jesus is going to speak to each one of those boys a little bit differently. It's going to be the same Jesus, but he's going to speak to them a little differently. I don't know what it's going to take to get through to John. I look down the road and kind of worry about that. Actually, I think Josie's probably a little bit more concerned than I am because the two are very close in temperament. They both feel things in the extreme. Josie when she's happy, she's very happy. When she's sad, she's very sad. And John's that way too, that he feels life to the fullest. And Michael's a little bit more analytical and cautious, and I think Matthew's just he's going to enjoy it no matter what happens. He's the baby. I think he'll be the comedian probably. And Jesus will confront each one of those three boys in a different way. And yet he's going to do it in the exact right way, whether it's going to be dislocating their hip, whether it's going to be like Peter, whether it takes denying Jesus 3 times before you figure it out. And here was Peter, was the guy yesterday we talked about. He was the one that Jesus said, "Who do you think I am?" He said, "Oh, you're the Son of God." That's who you are. But when it came to seeing the Son of God in reality on the cross, he couldn't deal with that. Peter said, "No, I don't know him. He's not what I expected. He's not what I wanted." Good thing God uses failures. In this process, I want to look at John 3:30. It's about John the Baptist. Here was a guy that knew the score. For a guy that eats bugs, he was pretty smart. If you think about that, that's kind of odd. Being a Celtic fan, I love Larry Bird. Because Larry Bird played basketball for me. He was the guy out there that maybe wasn't as fast or maybe couldn't jump as well. But boy, he could shoot the rock and he could play the game. And I always loved to watch Larry Bird play. The problem was I hated him when he was in college. Because my wife and I were big Drake fans, and we had season tickets to Drake basketball games, and we would watch Indiana State come in and watch Larry Bird light it up for 45 points in Vets Auditorium. This is before the days of the three-point line. And Larry Bird's offense was, the offense of Indiana State was drive, kick the ball to Larry in the corner, and watch him shoot. And that was it. And it was good enough to get him to the NCAA finals. Not quite good enough to get him over that hump. But so I loved watching Larry play, even though I kind of, geez, I wish he was somewhere else. Then when the Celtics took him, the Celtics are always, I'm waiting for them to make the big move. They're going to get somebody great because they always do. And they actually drafted Larry Bird after his junior year. Back in those days, you could do that because he could actually completed 4 years of college, so he was eligible for the draft. And they beat everybody to the punch and drafted him a year before. Gave up a draft pick that year and let him finish his senior year, and then the rest is basketball history, I guess. And it was really hard for me to watch Larry Bird retire. I mean, that was hard. I love the Celtics. I still love the Celtics. But Larry Bird knew when to leave. And those athletes that know when to leave are always the ones that, you kind of wish they'd hang around a little bit, but you hate seeing the guy that's striking out or that can't bring the ball up the floor anymore. Well, John the Baptist knew when to leave. And it's talking about, they're asking John about Jesus. And 30 is, he must become greater, I must become less. What a statement. If John the Baptist was around today, he'd probably have his own TV show, his own TV network, the Locust Network or something. And he'd be there in his fur and beard and on TV, and then just walk away from all that. Because John the Baptist was known by everybody. I mean, people came out in the middle of the desert to hear him talk. And he was known by the government of the day. Maybe not really liked by the government of the day, but he was known. And yet here he's saying, he must become greater, I must become less. And that's the key, I think, to really knowing Jesus, is to allowing yourself to become less. Not that we lose our personality. I mean, this isn't some Hindu idea of being absorbed into the universal God. This is me putting my will aside and allowing Jesus to recreate me in his image. You're still going to be you. Everything that you are, that you really are, is still going to be there. But I think the less means we care less and less about ourselves. Josie and I have talked a lot, and when we've worked with young people, we see a lot of hurts. I mean, there are a lot of kids that hurt and a lot of adults that hurt. And the one thing we have seen that the best thing to do, and if I could give you one word of advice, this would be it. If you're feeling depressed, do something for somebody. That's the key, because it gets your eyes off self and eyes onto others. And everyone goes through those fits. My dad, I think whenever my dad feels depressed, he goes out and buys something for people. That's just my dad. He likes to shop. He likes to buy things. Won't take my mom along, but he likes to buy things. Sometimes he gets a little carried away. Remember when we had Michael, Dad came over he got a video camera. Okay, this was the grandson. The DePue name will now be carried on. I think it was a little traumatic for some of my dad's relatives to realize it's going to be in a kid that's half Mexican. But the DePue name will be carried on. And so Dad buys a video camera and brings it out to Iowa City where we were living, the day after Michael's born. And they'd taken pictures, and they said, Dad, we don't have anything to watch this on. I guess we can hook the camera. Well, I bought you a VCR. Brings in the VCR. That's my dad. And that's how he serves. Occasionally it goes to extreme. I remember once at Christmas time, he got some eggnog ice cream. Anybody ever enjoy that? It's kind of okay, It's if you don't mind raw eggs, it's all right. But it was good, and then he says, how is it? And oh, it's all right, Dad. It's pretty good stuff. And so he went out and bought 5 gallons. And those of you who know my mom, she is a very practical person. And she told us, you guys we're not going to buy any more ice cream until all that eggnog ice cream is gone. And eggnog ice cream once is okay, twice is enough, and 3 times is way too many. And we had 5 gallons in our freezer. And so Mom's starting to put it into Jell-O. She made pumpkin pie, and I took a bite. Is there eggnog ice cream? Yes, there was. It was in the pumpkin pie. So be careful when you serve, But that's how my dad helps people. Others of you may help people step outside yourself by listening or by loving or by cleaning house or just by hanging out with them. Sometimes the most important thing you can do to people is just kind of be there, just to have fun with them, to play basketball with them, to knock them around a little bit on the floor. It just depends on the person, whatever it is that they need for that help. That gets your eyes off you, and it begins to focus on serving. And when you serve, you see Jesus as he really is, because Jesus was above all a servant. I think tomorrow we'll talk a little bit about communion and my experience with communion. I grew up in a Church of the Brethren, and I don't know if you're familiar with that church at all, but they have some really beautiful communion, some aspects of the communion that are really beautiful. And that sacrifice is really like communion. Okay, you're sharing the blood and the body of Jesus. And the Lord is always saying to us, you got to go beyond the basics of self, because worrying about repentance, worrying about salvation, worrying about the eternal condition of my soul is self. Now, those things are necessary, I think, to bring us to the point where we're willing to accept Jesus. But once we get to that point, to continually focus on me, whether it seems scriptural or not, is not healthy for a Christian. That eventually, that's going to stunt your growth. And we need to get to that point where we are so sure of our salvation, so sure of our position with Jesus, that we don't have to worry about that. But that doesn't mean you're not going to have crises of faith and moments of doubt. We all do. I go through phases where I'll just simply wake up in the middle of the night and this overwhelming thoughts that, what if it's all a hoax, and what if Jesus isn't real, and what if, to me, going to hell is not a concern. I know that I've done what I need to. The great concern for me is what if there's nothing after I die? That's the concern for me. And sometimes I'll wake up with just those feelings. And if I read my Bible or if I take some time to pray, it goes, and may come back later on. It's usually when I'm real tired that those things happen. I think that's a point where my mind gets manipulated. But anything that gets our eyes off self helps us to see Jesus. Anything that brings us into service, true service of others, not manipulative service of others. Josie and I, we fight in a real interesting way. Her background is real different than mine. Her background is, if you have a confrontation, you run away from it. And my background is, if you have a confrontation, you yell at each other about it for a while, then everything's fine. And in her family, if it ever came to yelling, that meant it was a big problem, if anybody ever raised their voice. And so when we first got married, we lived in this little apartment. Essentially, it was 2 rooms. It was a loft apartment. It was this big, huge bedroom, and then this other bigger room that had a little teeny kitchen and kind of a dining room and kind of a living room in it. And so when the first year of our marriage, our arguments were spent walking back and forth between the rooms, me, what's wrong, why won't you talk to me? And her saying, just leave me alone and let me think, just leave me alone and let me think. And we would just wear out the carpet. And so I got to the point where I began to get some really creative ways of getting at her. And one of my favorite things to do was to wash the dishes at her. Okay? I'm not washing the dishes for her. I'm washing them at her. I'll show her. I'll do something nice. I'm going to heap burning coals on her head, and I'd go do the dishes. And Josie's response to that is always kind of interesting, that she does the little things that she knows annoys me. We got to talking the other day. We'd had it wasn't anything major, just one of those typical periods of being married where you're on each other's nerves. And one of the things that really bothers me is if the toilet paper is put on so that the roll comes over the top. All right, a testimony. It bugs me. It doesn't work that way. It should come off the bottom. So she began to intentionally put it on so that it came over the top because she knew it got me mad. And so I'd pick up the house at her. That isn't good service. That's one of the distinctions I've made is it's the difference between service and servitude. Okay, that's the difference. I was in servitude at that point, and it was really letting her know about it. So I didn't bring a watch. Okay, we're running out of time. Anyway, that emptying of self to see Jesus where he really is. That's what it's all about. To get to that point in our lives, I think that's when we really receive and begin to experience true happiness. My mom is really a great woman. We were talking at breakfast and in the past. She was really hard to grow up with because she was, and Josie has even expressed this sometimes, because she seems so together. I mean, come on, lady, get mad. And as a kid, I would get her to the point where she'd get mad, and it was a hobby. I'm bored today. Mom! And that's what I think that's what always made my mom feel so. That's what. Once you get to know my mom, you either really love her or she makes you feel uncomfortable, or both. That's how I am. Because she confronts you, not by anything she says to you, but just by how she is. Why are you so happy? At breakfast, we were sharing a little experience that this is kind of an insight into my mom. My brother had a heart attack at the age of 33. I am now 33. And she called, we were in Iowa City at the time, and she called out, and Josie answered the phone, and it was, "Oh, how you doing, Josie?" And Josie starts to tell her how we're doing, on and on and on. And after about 5 minutes into the conversation, Mom says, "Well, we have a prayer request." "Oh, what's that?" "Well, Dan had a heart attack, and he's in the hospital." Okay? Get real, woman. Come on, you're supposed to be screaming and panicking, but she wouldn't. Okay? And yet, she has shaped me with that spirit. And my dad has shaped me with his spirit of giving. I mean, my dad's a good giver. He likes to give. And my mom likes to just support. And that's what she is. She's a supporter. She prays for you. And in those instances, they step out of self. And I have those models in my life to see how to step out of self and to confront reality. And behind the reality, whether it's I'm helping people with pain, or whether I'm just being a friend, or whether I'm just a teacher, or just a coworker, or just someone to listen, when I confront reality, there's Jesus back there, and I get to know him better, and I get closer and closer to the target. One last thing I want to look at is in Exodus 3:14. This is when Moses is asking God, who should I tell you? Who should I tell these people that you are? And God said to Moses, "I am who I am. That is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent you." He is. He exists. This afternoon, if you get a chance, I would like you to, this is your assignment. There will be a quiz over it this evening. Depends. No. I never answer those kinds of questions. Hebrews 11. I'd like you to read through Hebrews 11 if you get a chance. That's the faith honor roll. And look at that, and look at the people they talk about, and look at what they accomplished by faith. And put your name in there. By faith, insert your name, I have. Whatever. And begin to look at the ways that Jesus has used you, and begin to look at the ways that you have faced him, and the times you've been successful in facing him, and being changed by him. Because there have been times for each one of you. So if you get a chance, between basketball games, or maybe I can do it while they're taking me out in the ambulance, I don't know. Read that and see how Jesus would put you in that list. Okay? Thank you very much.